The World War had left Europe in complete and utter chaos, and post-war, all of the nations, both old and new, tried to find their own paths through the crisis. A few managed to cling on to fragile democracies. Many erupt into full-blown revolutions, but in 1922, the Italian kingdom tries a third way: fascism. Welcome to Between Two Wars, a summary of the interwar years, from the uncertainty and hedonism of the 1920s to humanity's descent into the darkness of the Second World War. I'm Indy Neidell. In 1915, Italy had joined the World War on the side of the Allies and eventually emerged victorious in 1918, but this had come at a cost. Italy had been economically unstable and extremely corrupt already before the war, and after it, the country descends into a much worse financial crisis than any of its allies. Contrary to many other nations where the war was initially popular with the people, in Italy, the majority of the Italian population had been against joining the war. And when the ruling class ignored public sentiment, it caused an uproar throughout the country. This conflict has not abated, and dissatisfaction with the government grows and grows. At this point, Italy is a constitutional monarchy, with suffrage for a very narrow electorate of mainly upper-class men. But to calm the unrest, Prime Minister Vittorio Emanuele Orlando proclaims universal male suffrage as a gift to the returning soldiers, hoping that the responsibility of having the vote will make them fall in line. But exactly the opposite occurs. Now, before the war, the Italian government had been mainly divided into liberals and conservatives. But when universal male suffrage is introduced, a whole slew of new political views and ideologies enter the political scene. Anarchism, reactionism, socialism, futurism, you name it. The extreme left-wing socialist and communist parties instantly go from tiny, insignificant parties to the major forces on the political scene. The liberal and conservative parties suddenly find themselves without a majority in the parliament for the first time ever. Governing becomes impossible as the political system becomes paralyzed by the opposition between so many different parties, each presenting its own way to solve Italy's problems. Orlando is forced to resign, and a period with no political stability whatsoever begins that will last until 1922. In these 4 years, Italy sees no fewer than 6 governments and 4 different prime ministers. Okay, the Socialist Party is quick to proclaim its support for Lenin and his newly founded international communist organization, the Comintern. The Italian socialists seek to join the proposed world communist takeover and proclaim a dictatorship of the proletariat. And with the chaos in which Italy finds herself, well, this could very well succeed. Labor protests, demonstrations, and massive strikes break out in the major industrial cities like Turin and Milan, organized by newly formed Marxist and communist councils modeled on the Russian Soviets. The strikes spread at an enormous pace. In 1919, more than 1,500 strikes are called in Italy. That's more than 4 new strikes every single day of the year. The movement intensifies in 1920 and peaks in August when over 1 million industrial workers join a general strike. The police are overwhelmed by the increasingly violent masses of workers, and the government turns to other means to put down the uprisings. As in Germany, they turn to nationalist, mostly anti-socialist, paramilitary groups known as the Fascis, from the Latin word fascis, which roughly translates to bundle, and has been used to describe fringe political groups in Italian since the 19th century. It's also the name of the symbol of power of the magistrates in ancient Rome, an axe wrapped in a bundle of rods, which the Fascis now adopt as their sign. The Fasci groups disagree on a lot of stuff, and they have no central leadership. They even fight each other in the streets at times, but there are common denominators. They're ultra-nationalist and ultra-violent. They despise their current government, whom they blame for the rather small territorial gains Italy acquires at the Paris Peace Conference. They literally worship the war, and last but not least, they dream of a militarist Italian rebirth that will bring about decisive and stable government. When consecutive prime ministers turn to these groups to stop the socialist unrest using violence, they do not disappoint. They suppress strikers by intimidating, beating, or even murdering any leftists that won't stand down. In the end, several thousand are actually murdered by the Fasci, and in just half a year, the socialist uprisings are all but gone. The fasci groups now join together in their opposition to socialism to create a united militia, the Squadristi. They adopt black uniforms to show their coherence and become known as black shirts. Now, the black shirts want to squash the socialists once and for all. So despite the uprisings being over, they continue to target socialist strongholds and murder left-wing leaders and activists. The government has unleashed a monstrous force it cannot stop, and it stands by helplessly as the black shirts take control of the country. Well, okay, at this point, Italy is really under nobody's control, not even God or his representative in the Vatican. But that is about to change in the hands of a man with a solid socialist background, Benito Amilcare Andrea Mussolini. Mussolini is a politically engaged journalist, a veteran of the World War, and an energetic nationalist and militarist. He's one of the founding fathers of the Fasci movement and is now crushing socialist unrest with enthusiastic violence. But Mussolini is a complex character, and he's still in the middle of a political journey from one extreme to the other. He was born in northern Italy to a socialist blacksmith and a devout Catholic schoolteacher. He grows up in a solidly socialist environment, but his mother also insists on traditional Catholic education. So young Benito ends up with two very different, well, even opposed influences. At the age of 19, he emigrates to Switzerland after an affair with the wife of a soldier, becomes a labor agitator, and when he is called up for military service, does not return to Italy, and is sentenced for desertion in absentia. He will eventually win an amnesty. He joins other exiled socialists and comes to work for the labor activist newspaper L'Avvenire del Lavoratore, The Worker's Future. Young Benito considers himself an intellectual. He is an avid reader and has a gift for languages, the written word and rhetoric. In Switzerland, he teaches himself French and German and studies political philosophy. He's greatly impressed with Nietzsche and the concept of Übermensch, or the superior being as an ideal. But, much like Hitler, he misunderstands the concept as automatically creating a juxtaposed concept of Untermensch, inferior people, which Nietzsche neither posits nor intends. Benito's greatest inspiration, though, is Georges Sorel, a French syndicalist philosopher who believes in the power of myth, especially national myth and violence, to achieve the ideas of Marxism, the overthrow of capitalism. Ironically, at the same time as Mussolini is studying his work, Sorel is about to make a dramatic about-face. In 1909, he abandons socialism and becomes a supporter of Maurasian integral nationalism, a philosophy that is in many ways the absolute opposite of socialism, an entrenched reactionary right-wing movement and outspoken enemy of all things on the left. Sorel has soured on the idea of a class struggle to abolish capitalism, and now believes that reactionary integral nationalism will do the trick and create a world beyond classes without private property. In 1914, he will proclaim that socialism is dead after the decomposition of Marxism. Benito Mussolini will eventually follow Sorel's lead. But for now, Mussolini stays on the far left and has even become one of the most prominent socialists in Italy. In 1911, he's imprisoned for 5 months for instigating riots against the Italian war in Libya. His journalism career is also taking off, with syndication of his work well beyond Italy, even in the US through the Hearst News Service, which will syndicate his work in translation until 1935, by which time he has long been dictator of Italy. In fact, Mussolini will continue to cover events around him as a roving reporter throughout his rise to power and his entire time in government. It becomes an important part of his self-promotion and the promotion of fascism, and his understanding of the power of mass media will be formative for Hitler and Goebbels in their work to promote the Nazi movement. It also serves as a document of his personal political journey, where we can see that by 1914 and the outbreak of the World War, there are cracks in Mussolini's socialist convictions. He has abandoned his belief in the struggle of the classes and started drifting towards more liberal democratic values. As the debate rages over Italian intervention in the war, Mussolini is at first on the socialist side of opposing the war. But his recent interest in integral nationalism has brought him to focus on Italians as an own ethnicity, and he soon comes to believe that the war offers an opportunity to crush the Austro-Hungarian Empire and liberate Italian speakers in Austria. When he comes out publicly for the war, he is expelled from the Socialist Party. With money from agents of the French government and the Italian arms industry, he starts an interventionist newspaper, Il Popolo d'Italia, the Italian people, and founds a political group, Fasci Rivoluzionari di Azione Internazionalista, the Faction for Revolutionary International Action. Now Mussolini more or less abandons all of his socialist ideas overnight, later saying socialism as a doctrine was already dead. It continued to exist only as a grudge. Instead, he embraces a program based on democratic republicanism, including demands for universal suffrage, freedom of speech, an 8-hour workday, abolition of the monarchy, and creation of a new Italian republic. And then he goes off to fight the war. Let's be clear. By that time, he was one of the most famous people in Italy, and both enlisted men and officers asked to meet him. He was discharged in early 1917 after a grenade supposedly went off during training. There were no eyewitnesses to this, and he had an unusually long convalescence, a few months in hospital and then a year's leave. And historian Paul O'Brien says the leave was so long because of syphilis and its complications. But whatever actually happened, strings were being pulled to get him out of the army and back to work. He had made himself known even outside Italy as a hard propagandist for the war. Mussolini glorifies the war as an honorable chapter in Italy's as well as his own life, saying, "Let us have a dagger between our teeth, a bomb in our hand, and an infinite scorn in our hearts." The British Secret Service recruit him to publish pro-war propaganda and use his political group to intimidate anti-war protesters to stay at home. They put him on a weekly retainer of £100, slightly more than $12,000 in 2018. Enough money for Mussolini to start his independent political career, which won't really go in the direction the British had hoped for. He now becomes a leader of one of the many fasci groups and reforms his political group into a paramilitary unit with 200 members, naming it Fasci Italiani di Combattimento, roughly the Italian Combat Squad. He also founds the Fascist Revolutionary Party to run for election in 1919. In the party program, though, he still incorporates many socialist ideas, ostensibly out of populism, so much so that it has been said that his failure to win a seat in parliament in 1919 was because he tried to out-socialist the socialists. Electoral defeat has him rethink his political strategy. He needs something that can be attractive to more than just the working class, and what he comes up with is significantly more radical and colored by a deep belief in integral nationalism, not by socialism. He argues that Italy has been stopped in its growth toward new greatness by the plutocratic nations like Great Britain, blocking her from land expansion to fill the needs of the Italian people. He believes that the high birth rate in Italy is proof that they are a superior race that deserves more land at the expense of lesser people like the Slavs. Or, as he says in 1920, the Italian border should run across the Brenner Pass, Monte Nevoso, and the Dinaric Alps. I would say we can easily sacrifice 500,000 barbaric Slavs for 50,000 Italians. He even thinks that birth rates need to increase to double the population to 60 million or more, which, by his calculations, is the size to properly militarize Italy as a strong, independent power. His goal is to expand Italy throughout the Mediterranean and subjugate non-Italian-speaking peoples that he classifies as Slavs, Black Africans, and Arabs, all servile client races of the Italians. Now, this goes much, much further than the more easily justifiable claims for regions with large Italian-speaking populations in Austria-Hungary. So, he promotes a mythical connection between ancient Rome and Italy to justify his expansive ideas. He now embraces traditional gender values, folklore as an ideal for the ethnic nation, and a return to truly Italian traditions. He plans a strong militarization of Italy to enforce his goals at home and abroad. He abandons his anti-capitalism to instead embrace private entrepreneurship with an element of syndicalism thrown in to give workers more influence without eliminating the traditional employer-employee relationship in a corporatist structure. Sorry to digress. And he proposes that the only solution to Italy's woes is a strong, mighty leader. And although he does not spell it out, he means Benito Mussolini. From this perspective, it's perhaps not astonishing that he is infuriated with Italy not receiving Dalmatia and other land in the Versailles Treaty, and going so far as to say that Great Britain and France had spat on the Italian sacrifice in the war. Meanwhile, he's consolidating the various fascist splinter groups into a cohesive unit under the Fascist Party banner. The fasci are by now the only way of keeping order and have been armed and funded by the state. In effect, Mussolini, a disenfranchised socialist and aspiring politician from provincial Romagna without a seat in parliament, is becoming more powerful than the actual government. The liberal Prime Minister Giovanni Giolitti invites Mussolini to be part of a center-to-right national bloc against left-wing opposition and calls for elections in May 1921. Mussolini does get a seat in parliament, but the national bloc fails to achieve a majority. Mussolini continues his consolidation of the fascis. His party rallies are now gathering tens of thousands of supporters, and party membership soars to 320,000, of which 2,200 are armed black shirts. In November, the party changes name to Partito Nazionale Fascista, the National Fascist Party. Yet another government fails. And in February 1922, King Vittorio Emanuele asks the center-right liberal Luigi Facta to form a new government. But this too is paralyzed as the fascists continue to wreak havoc, and the fascist calls for a new order grow louder and louder. On October 24th, 1922, Mussolini arranges a fascist rally in Naples. 60,000 attend. He addresses the crowd, and in a huge reversal of policy, proclaims his support for the monarchy and the king. He lambasts democracy, complaining that it has only weakened Italy, and proposes that only a strong, united leadership can rule the nation. He concludes, "Today, without a shot being fired, we captured the vibrant soul of Naples, the soul of all southern Italy. The demonstration is an end in itself and cannot turn into a battle. But I say to you, with all the solemnity that the moment requires, either we will be given the government or else we must take it by marching on Rome." So he is ready to take the power by violence, demands at least 6 government positions for the fascist party. 30,000 fascist supporters set out on a 150-mile march on Rome. False rumors of hundreds of thousands of marching and plundering fascists circulate, and panic spreads throughout the country. But Prime Minister Facta knows the truth, and that the army could easily stop this, so he goes to the king for permission to call in the military to stop the fascists. For reasons that remain unclear, the king refuses. Facta is shocked and immediately resigns, and the king promptly calls on Mussolini to form a new government. Mussolini joins the march just before Rome and enters the city to accept the post of Prime Minister of Italy. So you'd think that that was it. He was now in charge, right? But here's the thing. Mussolini was not dictator yet. He was merely the next in a long line of prime ministers. No one expected him to stay in power, and why should they? Why would they? The fascists only have a minority of the government posts, and Mussolini has lost the trust of almost every party in parliament. Everyone agrees that Mussolini will be quickly replaced like all of the other prime ministers. They're wrong. With continued paramilitary support, Mussolini will stay in power. Over the next 5 years, his black shirts will continue to intimidate, oppress, and murder fascist opponents into submission. And by 1927, Mussolini will have become dictator of Italy. His rise to power and his violent methods will not only cause great havoc in Italy, but will serve as a blueprint for all future fascist-inspired movements. In Germany, with the addition of some German efficiency, Mussolini's methods will soon be taken to an even more aggressive and oppressive level. To get our episodes ahead of time and support the effort to make more content like this, join the TimeGhost Army on Patreon or directly at our timeghost.tv website. There, you can also sign up for our forum for free. Links are in the description. And if you missed our episode about how Hitler formed the Nazi Party in 1920 and the German people resisted an extreme right-wing coup, It's right here. And if you have not already, subscribe to TimeGhost and World War II on YouTube. World War II week by week starts September 1st, 2018. See you next time. Salute!